All right, let's talk about Star Wars, because some absolutely massive news just dropped. After more than a decade running Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy is officially stepping down. This is huge. It really marks the end of a major and, let's be honest, a very, very controversial era for one of the biggest franchises in movie history. So how did we get here, and what does it all mean? Here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll break down the actual leadership change. Then, we'll get into the two completely different sides of this story, the official version of success and the fan perspective that a legacy was betrayed. We'll dig into the biggest disagreements, look ahead at what's next for Star Wars, and wrap it all up with the big question this whole situation raises. Okay, so first up, what's actually happening at the top of Lucasfilm? Kathleen Kennedy has been in charge for nearly 14 years. I mean, think about that. She has overseen the entire Disney era of Star Wars, from the record-breaking release of The Force Awakens to the incredibly divisive Last Jedi, and then the whole pivot to streaming with shows like The Mandalorian. It's been a wild ride, to say the least. Now, according to her big exit interview with Deadline, this wasn't some sudden move. Apparently, this transition has been in the works with Disney for 2 whole years, which, of course, brings us to the question on everyone's mind. Who's flying the ship now? Well, they're actually splitting the role, which is really interesting. On the creative side, you've got Dave Filoni. Yeah, that Dave Filoni, George Lucas's own protege from the Clone Wars days. He's now the chief creative officer, in charge of the whole story. Then, on the business side, you have Lin Brennan. A lot of people are hoping the structure gets back to the old Lucas model, separating the creative from the corporate. Okay, so let's look at Kennedy's side of the story here. How does she see her own legacy? Well, to hear her tell it, her time in charge was a period of massive success and necessary growth for Star Wars. And you gotta start with the money, right? The argument for success really begins with this one giant number, nearly $6 billion. That's what the 5 movies made under her watch pulled in at the worldwide box office. I mean, from a purely financial standpoint, you just can't argue with that. It's a staggering success. And it wasn't just about the movies. Her camp is quick to point out how much the brand itself expanded. We're talking tons of Emmy nominations for shows like Andor, all the new animated series, and of course, the giant immersive Galaxy's Edge theme parks. The footprint of Star Wars just got way, way bigger. And this quote right here really gets to the heart of her entire philosophy. She believed that to keep Star Wars alive, you had to grow beyond the original stories. You had to find new characters and appeal to a new generation of fans. In her eyes, that's exactly what she accomplished. But, and this is a pretty big but, that official story of success is not the whole story. Not by a long shot. There's a huge, very vocal part of the fan base that saw her tenure not as an expansion, but as a betrayal. And this, right here, might be the single biggest point of conflict. George Lucas himself has confirmed that when he sold Lucasfilm, he handed over his own story outlines for the sequel trilogy. But the company, under Kennedy's leadership, made the decision to toss those plans aside and start fresh. For many critics, that one decision is the root cause of all their issues. They argue it led to a trilogy that felt like it had no plan, that it disrespected legacy characters, especially what they did with Luke Skywalker, and that it ultimately alienated the core fans who built the franchise in the first place. So you've got these two totally opposite narratives. Let's really dig in and look at the specific points where the official story and the fan critique clash the hardest. Let's start with a quote that just blew up online. At one point, Kennedy claimed that, unlike other big franchises, Star Wars doesn't really have any source material to adapt. And the reaction from fans was, well, it was immediate and intense. People were pointing to decades worth of novels, comics, and games from the old expanded universe. For them, this wasn't just a simple mistake. They saw it as proof that she fundamentally didn't understand the properties she was in charge of. Then there's how Kennedy has characterized her critics. She's described them as a very, very small percentage of the fan base, who basically just want to see the same thing over and over. So the question is that really true? Was the dissatisfaction really just coming from a tiny vocal minority? Well, let's look at the numbers. Now, don't get me wrong, all 3 of these movies made a ton of money. But look at the trend. The Force Awakens cleared $2 billion. The Last Jedi dropped to $1.3 billion. And The Rise of Skywalker just barely scraped past $1 billion. That's a $1 billion drop from the first film to the last. That kind of suggests that maybe more than a very small percentage of people were checking out. And finally, there's the assertion that George Lucas himself is happy with how things turned out. That idea is pretty directly contradicted by Lucas's own words. In one now famous, candid interview, he half-jokingly said he sold his creation to white slavers and made it clear he was disappointed his story ideas were just thrown out. So, with Kennedy's era coming to a close, what about the future? All eyes are now turning to Dave Filoni to see what he's going to do. And right now, the fan base is completely torn. On one hand, there's a ton of hope. This is Lucas's own apprentice, the guy who really seems to get Star Wars. But on the other hand, there's skepticism. His more recent shows have been pretty divisive, and he's still stuck with his sequel trilogy being canon. He can't just erase it. So it's a real mixed bag of hope and fear out there. So when you put it all together, what are you left with? It's really truly a tale of two completely different legacies. One side sees her as a visionary executive who achieved incredible financial success and modernized a classic brand. The other side sees a steward who misunderstood the assignment, alienated the core fans, and ultimately damaged the heart and soul of the stories she was given. Ultimately, Kennedy's departure leaves us with a huge question. And it's not just about Star Wars, it's about all of modern entertainment. As these franchises become more and more corporate, where do you draw the line between evolving a story for new fans and honoring the legacy that made it special to begin with? The answer to that question is probably going to define the next decade of storytelling.